Okay, it says we're live. I think that means we're live.
All right. I think we're live. We are good at knowing when that happens on this show. We are, as usual, really excited about our guest, Ashley. I am going to start us off with our rating because I'm definitely going to be using the fuck word tonight. I'm not supposed to say that until after the rating. I'm going to use the F word tonight. And our rating is R for language, terror, and some disturbing images. So get ready.
Mostly mine.
The disturbing images are here already. I am really excited because we're going to talk about peer support and burnout and co-optation and storytelling, which are all things I love to talk about. I am Jess, and in general, I love to talk about suicide. Yeah, I know, it's weird. It's like I have a show called Suicide and Stuff with you or something. I'm a mad queer feminist witch and care worker in so-called Denver, which is land that's stolen from the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Ute, and Sioux people. I've spent most of my career creating pathways to intersectional justice-based emotional support for marginalized communities. At least that's what I try to work on. I believe in mutual aid and disability justice and abolition and other liberation ideologies as an integral component to solving the problems of social justice that lead to suicide. And right now I'm really interested in talking about epistemology and capitalism, so I'm sure I'll end up there at some point, and ethics in the context of our work. And I work at Rocky Mountain Crisis Partners as the Director of Program Development. We do our statewide crisis and peer support lines here. So, Des, want to introduce yourself?
No, I don't ever want to introduce myself. And I keep forgetting to write it down. Look, this is my bio right here. It's just, this is where we're at in life.
This is Des. Des is fragile, and she's the creator of Live Through This.
And I'm
really
sad.
An important place where she keeps all of our stories, which is really important to me because otherwise our stories don't get told and they get erased in history. So thanks, Des, for doing that. There's your introduction. Is that good?
I like that. Thanks. I didn't even have to talk.
You didn't even have to talk. I got you. You're too fragile today. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Your intro was so thorough. Just that I wrote.
Yours doesn't have to be that thorough.
I wrote my bio, and I feel like I could just read that, or they could just read that. I don't know. No, I'll tell you. I am a certified peer specialist. Oh yeah, my name's Ashley Loftin Murray, and I'm a certified peer specialist, writer, artist, activist. I do a lot of different things. And yeah, I basically believe in everything that Jess was talking about, and that's why I'm here.
I only like to bring like-minded individuals onto our show. That's not actually true. We brought some people I've been very nervous about because I thought they weren't like-minded enough.
We were surprised. Can you believe?
And sometimes I was surprised by them, and I still have questions about whether or not I feel like that was real. But it's okay. So
okay, but I not to just derail things, but I think that speaks to something that the people, the kids that I work with. So I didn't say in my intro, but I work with kids ages 12 to 19 in a group hope setting. So most of them are coming directly out of psych treatment. Some are in care of DCF, and some are in care of DMH. So I think that what you were saying speaks exactly to the thing that makes peer support so powerful, is the fact that you do talk to people. Some in this field, you're surprised by what they say. You think, okay, this person is chill, this person is cool, I can trust them. And then that's not the case at all. And that's the kind of trauma that the kids that I work with are going through repeatedly as they cycle through providers. So I just thought that it was funny that you brought it up right in the beginning, because that's one of the things that I try to talk about a lot when I'm doing my peer support intro for new hires and things like that, is that you have to be 100% genuine all the time. And if you're not, get out.
Yeah, and that level of vulnerability is like a hard thing to maintain and isn't generally respected in the mental health community. You're so brave. No, we won't do that to you.
I know I'm brave.
It's my least favorite thing that people say to me. It makes me like want to act crazy. And they already think I'm crazy, so it's hard. But I think that's like one of the things that's so interesting about doing peer support work in a clinical space is that I don't think there's the same amount of like understanding and respect for like what it means to show up as your authentic self and like connect with people in that way. Because so much of what clinical work teaches folks to do is to create distance between them and the people that they're serving, which I think is sort of the problem with clinical work. Because I think we should be trying to get closer together, not farther apart. That's a different thing for a different day, probably.
I don't know, because like I didn't talk about this before, but I also worked 2 years, like, you know, while I was doing peer support, you know, they ask you to take on like additional responsibilities and you get heaped with a lot of work that isn't your own, that you don't get compensated for. But one of the things that I did for 2 years was I was a groups coordinator. So I helped facilitate groups, and I helped supervise graduate clinical interns in the groups facilitator space. So,
and they just paid you your peer support salary for that?
Yes.
0 out of 10. That's bad.
0 out of 10. -10.
But it's cool that you got to do. That's a cool opportunity to have, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, that is the thing, right? It's an opportunity, and so you take it. But one of the reasons why I took it, other than the fact that I'm really into groups, and especially creative groups, not groups where you sit and you color for an hour and then they tell you to leave. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do that is because I got to work directly with these graduate students who are becoming clinicians, and across the board at the end of their year. Well, the first year I wasn't a groups coordinator, but I was a facilitator, so I still worked with the interns. And across the board, every year when they leave their internship, a lot of them say that the most powerful thing for them was learning from the peer support specialists, because they are so relieved to hear that there are people doing work, like you said, that are bringing you closer to the people that you're trying to serve, and not purposely putting up a wall. It feels like these poor, most of them are younger than I am, these interns, and they're so disillusioned by what they're learning in their classes, that it's a relief to hear from the peer support specialists and see that there is another way, and that it's super effective. Like Pokemon, sorry. Super effective.
Yeah, I think that it is powerful for people. And I think sometimes I've had the experience of clinical staff being so excited about peer support that they like want to do it, but they want to do it in their clinical setting with their clinical pay and things like that, which is not how it works. So then there gets to be some like weird co-optation and things that end up happening sometimes as well. But I think it is helpful for people to be exposed to other ideas in other ways. And I wish that, you know, peers would be compensated similarly, and then people could take a pathway into peer support as an alternative intervention instead of feeling like they have to get a clinical degree to go support people.
Right. And I think that being involved in like being served by a clinical practice shouldn't be what connects you to peer support. You know, like the kids that I work with, a lot of them wouldn't have a peer support specialist if they weren't part of the greater service, which is the psychiatrist, the clinician, and then the clinician thinks, oh, a peer support worker would be good. I'm going to put in a referral. So if the direct path was to peer support and that was an option, I think that would be ideal.
Yeah, so there's a lot of service bundling that happens. So one of the things we said we were going to start with, which we haven't quite gotten there yet, but
I'm doing this. I'm just like taking you away from everything.
It's okay. We don't have to follow my agenda. So the
agenda.
way nonprofits are structured is like set up in a way that's sort of antithetical to, I think, a lot of things going well, but particularly antithetical to some of the ways that peer support works, particularly if we have peer support embedded in a clinical setting, because some of the things you're talking about, like that bundling of services where you can only access this thing if you're also getting all of this other stuff. So like you have to be med compliant to keep your peer specialist and things like that shouldn't be connected to each other, end up being all connected as like one service, and you have to do it all or nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I just I hate the term med compliance so much. Mm-hmm. That's for beef corner. That's for beef corner.
I also hate that corner.
Every time I hear it, it's like, ooh.
I know. Yeah, it's like getting stabbed. So I've been frequently labeled non-compliant. I have some of my old records. I actually don't have them anymore. I burned them all. It was very
cathartic.
But I did have my old records, and I had like this big, like this one agency had like a non-compliant stamp that they used, and it was like on the front of my chart was like non-compliant. And for a while I was like, I want to get that as a tattoo. But yeah, just that like the dependence of the system on like medication compliance as like an intervention is really gross. It sucks.
Yeah. And definitely, like, as a person who's been hospitalized several times, I've, a lot of my primary trauma, I think, is like feeling like I didn't have a choice in terms of the medication that I was taking. Mm-hmm. And then as a result, it making me extremely sick, and yeah, mm-hmm. No good.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about nonprofits, because we're basically today doing an hour of Beef Corner.
1 hour.
We'll take a break from some beefs to talk about other beefs, but like let's talk about what's wrong with nonprofits as a starting off point.
What's wrong with nonprofits?
Like the nonprofit industrial complex, the white saviorism, that like woke virtue signaling stuff, all of
Jess,
that.
We have 42 minutes left. What the fuck?
That's what we have to talk about. All that stuff as our first option.
Yeah. Well, I think, so this is my experience, is that the white saviorism and that the virtue signaling and that kind of thing is like, for me, in my experience, it's become like an accountability problem where people are looking at things like on such a like broader systemic scale, like within the nonprofit world, that if you start looking at the dynamics that are playing out like in your own organization or in your own building, you start kind of like making excuses for the behavior of others. Like, okay, so this is they're treating our kids this way because of this, and they're doing this because of this. And it's like, yes, that's all well and good. It's good to be understanding. But there's also like an accountability piece that always needs to be held, because the first priority are the people that like these are literally kids. So they're depending on us. So I think that like in general, people are kind of like tiptoeing around, afraid to hold people accountable. And I think that the politics of like the nonprofit world come into that, and like the fears of like, HR and PR and like all of that stuff plays into that.
Yeah. I think it's something that happens in all kinds of spaces where, like, because we're so used to power systems as they exist, we will replicate oppression when we get into positions of power sometimes. And lots of people do it in lots of different ways in all kinds of different settings, I think. But I see that play out in activist spaces as well as in nonprofits. And but nonprofits tend to have less pathways for accountability around that stuff.
Yes. Yes, I like the way that you said it, because I was kind of like speaking around it. I was like, I don't know how to say what I'm saying.
So I think a lot of what happens is like people start enacting these like this power over each other, over other staff. So you see it play out among the staff and between the staff and the people they're supposed to be serving. And I think it actually comes from people like wanting. I think people want to do the right thing sometimes. They just don't know what to do with it. And then when they're put in situations where they feel challenged, their sort of go-to move is to like do things that are coercive or oppressive.
Yes.
So how have you seen that kind of play out? Like, what are ways that that's played out in your experience?
I can think of a lot of different ways. Yeah, I mean, in terms of what you said about staff enacting power over other staff or people in other positions, like I think that the bulk of the challenges that I've run into have been interdepartmental, and especially when I was first hired, I think that like as a peer support specialist, I think that peer support specialists kind of had a bad reputation from the get-go, so people weren't really sure what to expect from me. And then I came in just kind of like one of my clinician friends from the organization always says that you came in here like you were going to burn the place down, and I'm like, yes, that is exactly how I came in.
That's how I like to show up places. That's a great way to show up.
It's a great way to create and maintain relationships with your coworkers and to be understood. No, it was a terrible way. I fucked up big time. Just in terms of the way that I have this very, when it comes to mental health, I have this very like black and white sense of justice, and especially like in the moment, if I see a staff like talking down to someone that we're serving, or like just doing anything that I don't like, I have this kind of like trauma reaction, I think, where I have to come in and like defend and like be a warrior, because now, even though I'm technically not in like a big position of power, I am in a position of power, and I do have a voice here. So I was that person that people really didn't like and didn't want to like say hi to. I would get like the cold shoulder, like, hey, good morning, how are you? Like nothing, crickets. And that was hard. That like the first year of being a peer support specialist was hard because of that. But along the way, like with really great support from my supervisor at the time, I learned how to kind of like finesse those relationships. And really, I was doing peer support work with my coworkers, because if I could make it personal to them, then they understood and related. And so it's like in the moment, though, it was like, well, you just got here. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like I had somebody tell me that, oh, my mom's here. I'm sorry.
That's exciting.
So Katie McLaughlin is mom?
No, Davina Goodman is mom.
I love when Dez's mom shows up. My sister makes appearances. She usually brings the rage as well.
Sometimes we get a mom too, but yeah, moms are always welcome here.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the big problems that I see is that hopefully this is still working. I don't know where Des went. So I think one of the big problems that I've seen is when there's not like enough peers. I think there's like a critical mass of like having peer workers who can work alongside clinical workers to make it like a safe place for them to do that. Like, I don't think there should ever be a peer specialist working alone. I think that's just like it should be an industry standard that they never work alone. And like, you shouldn't have just 2 peer specialists and then like 45 clinical staff. Like, that's bad too, because there's just so many ways that oppression can be replicated there. But so many nonprofits are just like adding peer workers. They're like, I heard peer support was good. We don't know what it is. We're going to write a job description that says nothing on it and teach you how to do screenings. Here you go. Which is like not really peer work, right?
Right.
Screening.
And I mean, luckily, like when I was going into it, I knew what peer support was.
Yeah.
But for people who are thinking like, oh, maybe I could do this, or like they're looking, sometimes I have seen people like, okay, I was looking at the job listing. There was a listing for an outreach worker and a listing for a peer support worker, and I didn't know which one to apply to. And my question is, well, do you have relative, like in any sort of relevant lived experience? No, then you don't.
Then you can't be a peer.
That has actually happened.
Wait, we have a question.
Mm.
Is peer worker a regional thing? I've never seen one. Liz is in the Chicago area.
So there are definitely peers in Chicago, but I bet there's lots of settings where they're not there or where they're really hard to access, which is another one of the things we wanted to talk about. We did address that a little bit, like how you have to get to a peer worker through specific other services. You can't just like call and say, hey, can I have a peer? In a lot of places.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like where I come from Arkansas, and Jess, your face. Woo!
It's like, oh, that sounds hard.
It was, and also I had never heard of peer support when I was living in Arkansas, which is where I was first hospitalized. So yeah. I didn't know what peer support was until I moved to Massachusetts. And peer support workers right now are kind of like the big new thing. It's like the big new woke thing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's happening some in Colorado too, that like people are like, we've seen some evidence, like we've seen some research that says peer support is good. So we want to have it.
Right.
We don't want to invest any time in figuring out how to do this well. And they're not creating pipelines to like leadership for peers in their work. They're not creating like multiple levels of supervision where peers are getting to report to other people with lived experience. So what ends up happening is there's this kind of like weird side department that's like super underpaid. And they're like, why does it turn over so much? Like, why can't we keep people? We don't pay them anything, and then we don't know what they do, and we treat them badly. I don't understand why they don't want to stay working here.
Who needs a living wage? Not these guys.
Yeah. Jess, this is your formal invitation to come and do a presentation where I work. Please do it.
Oh, I would love to talk to that. We're actually, one of the programs that we're running right now at my agency is that we're providing supervision for peers who don't have other peers higher up in their organization. So they do telephonic supervision with our team. And I think that's been really powerful for people to just have someone processing what's happening who knows about it, as opposed to, because in our organization, there's like peers at, I think, in 5 different levels of the organization, right? You can move way up in our system. But that's pretty unusual.
Yeah. For me, you know, I've been a peer support specialist for 3 years, and there's nowhere for me to go. Like in terms of, I can't make more money. I've advocated to make more money and I don't. I can't apply to be the peer support supervisor or coordinator because that position doesn't exist. That position is actually for anybody who will take it on for free. So I'm actually supervised by a really, really great person, Romesa. Shout out to Romesa. And she's an occupational therapist and a super amazing, lovely person. But you know, I am with you that I do think that peers should be supervised by other peers, and especially like trained peers who know what they're doing and know what they're talking about, so that when new peers come in, they know what they're doing and they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So I think this whole situation that we've kind of described is like what leads to burnout, right? Which is on our list of stuff to talk about. So let's get into that. I think I'm mildly obsessed with Vicki Reynolds, who talks about burnout being ethical pain. Mildly. An understatement. That like it's a spiritual pain or an ethical pain that we experience because we work within systems that are not just, and we send people back out into systems that aren't just. And so we have to learn to sort of like do this work with broken hearts, right? And I think like the system we just described is such a perfect like encapsulation of that. Like this is a system that will produce ethical pain. Like there's no way to avoid it. And if you're not doing something as an agency to change that, you will have workers burn out. And I think that's something that you described as happening with you, right? So tell us about what burnout is like.
For me, man, it was so up and down because like burnout for me was this like 3-year journey where I have now reached the level of I am so burnt out from this. I feel like I can't do it anymore. And when I first started, like, you know, it started from day one of like, okay, so I have to come in every day and say hi to people who don't say hi back to me because they don't like what I have to say about the system and what I have to say about like proper care for our youth. So it started there because like it feels like going to high school and being bullied and then coming back home, you know, and then having to like deal with that. And then you start getting assigned your cases and you know, there's an extra layer to treatment when you are a peer support specialist because almost everything that you do brings up something very personal for you. And you're like, for me, especially in the beginning, I felt completely raw and like so exposed. And like I didn't have the benefit of like going to work every day and having my life be anonymous or like my own private business. Like everybody knew what my diagnoses were. Everybody, like, they were watching to see if I was anxious. They were, you know, like they were like reading me to see like what was going on with me. So, and like in some cases, like if those people are my friends, then I appreciate that. But for other people, it's none of their goddamn business. But yeah, it was just very like raw and emotional to do the work with kids, especially because I am a suicide attempt survivor and I survived my suicide attempt when I was 15. So most of the kids that I was working with were my age or very close to my age when I attempted suicide. And they were also dealing with those same feelings. And in some cases, the same like dynamics at home that like helped create those feelings in me. And like just feeling, I don't know. I don't know what happened, but the more that I did the work, the more trapped I started to feel in the work. I felt like I had to do it because I did it well, and that I couldn't stop if I needed to. So in 2018, my dad died. And I got 3 days of bereavement. But I was told that to take as long as I need, but I wouldn't get paid for like more than those 3 days of bereavement. It would be all or so I couldn't take I took 2 weeks, but it was a really traumatic experience for me. Like, it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And then I went back to work. And I would sit in my office and I would cry and cry and cry. And then I would pull it together and I would see the kids that I work with. And I would try to do therapy. And all the while I was dying inside, literally. Yeah. And having like horrible insomnia, flashbacks, like it was bad. And so that, like, a couple of months later, I ended up in the ER because I was so distressed. And then I took a medical leave. I took a month off. And then I came back and I was feeling a lot better. And it was kind of like when you skip a rock across water. I was just like back, and then I was back down, back. And like, that's what burnout is. It's like being skipped across water. And then finally at the end of all those skips, you sink. Mm-hmm. And I have recently sunk.
Yeah, I think it's like this. I think the experience of burnout can just be like trying and trying and trying. And the more you try, the less things feel like they're working. So it just gets harder and harder to do anything, and then to feel like anything is successful, whether or not you're actually being successful. Like, I don't know who defines that exactly, but like if on the outside people might see you as being successful, the more you try, the harder it gets. And then there's just a breaking point for it. Right. And then it's like a problem with you, like the organization sees it as a problem that's yours, usually, and not a problem that's like created by these systems that we're working in.
Luckily, I think that for me, so I took a step back. I dropped almost all of my cases. I decided to stay on for one because it was a special case. But I think that, oh my God, what was I saying?
I felt like you were able to like take a step back and drop down on your caseload. And is your organization being supportive-ish? Okay. Do we not want to go there? We don't have to go there if we don't.
I have some extremely like I have a small little army of people behind me who either support me like very openly or make sure that they know that I'm supported. And I think that that's great. I think that in terms of like, I've rocked the boat. I really have. I've offended some people, and I've exposed some things that people would probably rather not talk about out in the open. But I think that it was essential, because if I was going to leave my job as a peer, like if I was going to leave this job that I helped create at this organization, then I was going to make sure that they knew what they needed to fix while I was going out. If I couldn't fix it, then I needed them to know what they needed to do. So hopefully somebody else who has more energy can do it. But at that point, I was like, everything that I'm doing, just like slamming my head against a wall.
Yeah. So I think that's, I like Isabel's comment about.
I was just going to say that.
Yep. So like during this process, how many times were people like, you should do more self-care, instead of figuring out like collective care methods, figuring out methods that the organization can change to support their staff. If this isn't it, because you're not the first peer specialist to start there and struggle.
So I was the 7th and last to leave in the way that I did. So at that point, it was easy for people or for my supervisor to say, well, look, this is obviously not a problem with the peer support specialist. This is obviously not, okay, somebody's too sensitive. Like, this is an actual problem. And I think that one good thing that came out of my stepping back in the way that I did is that it exposed the problem. And as for the self-care piece, of course, like as an organization, like as a nonprofit organization, you get that, like, take care of yourself, like clinicians, why don't you take some time off, like peer support specialists, like, you know,
a yoga.
Well, it's very much like, do what you have to do to take care of yourself. But also we have a treatment meeting in 2 hours. And if you're not able to be there, you're in, we really need you to be there, you know, or, but I will say for peer support specialists, it was so much more lenient where I worked. Like this isn't all beefs. Like for peer support specialists, it was more lenient. And I think with the clinicians, especially, like, you know, because most clinician, I don't know about most, but most of the clinicians that I know have some kind of lived experience. And so like for them, it was like even harder, if I'm going to be honest, just in terms of like self-care. What is that? We don't know her.
I'm loving all our comments from people online who are basically like, here's all the terrible things people tell you to do for self-care, as if they're going to fix these like big fucking problem, right? Like people don't burn out because of like some kind of like personal broken thing inside them. Like these are big systemic issues that we're like grappling with. Like we're being like impacted by the world, and then somebody's like, oh well, like what are you doing to handle that better?
Right.
Like we don't need to change the world, we need to change you.
Manifest.
Oh, okay. Do we want to do a brief break from these beefs to do just a traditional beef corner, which is where we can talk shit about anything very briefly before we talk about storytelling, which is what I'm really excited about.
You know what?
It's time for beef.
Oh my God.
I just will never regret showing you this video.
You shouldn't. It's glorious.
Okay.
Why didn't you guys warn me about this?
Why would I warn you about this? It's majestic.
It's Doja Cat and her music video for "Bitch, I'm a Cow."
Before she got really famous.
Yeah. Okay, so here's my beef for the day. There's public comment right now on 988, and everyone should public comment on it. And I should be very clear, I'm not talking as a representative of my organization, but what the fuck are we thinking that we need to do a geolocation service so that we are automatically already entering into relationships with people that are coercive from the very beginning of crisis care? So 988 is the new hotline. The new hotline is like the new lifeline. And they have written into this legislation that we need to explore how we would do tracking everyone's phones that calls us, everyone's calls. What the fuck? The only reason you would do that, the only reason to do that is coercion. You can say it's because we want to route people to the right area code, whatever, to the right call center, whatever. There are so many other ways to do that.
They can do that without geolocation. They have been.
They have. It's the FCC that does it, and the FCC knows where our phone numbers are attached, what address they're attached to, because they're the fucking phone companies. I'm really angry about it. I don't understand. Like, so this means that every crisis center basically is going to get consumed by 988 and then have to be coercive, like always already be coercive. And I have no interest in participating in that shit. I don't understand why we're here. Like, we already have cops. You don't need to make us into fucking cops.
Right.
Anyway, that's my beef.
Why ever not? Leia, put the link in there for the comments, because I know you have it.
I got it. Oh, Leia's got it too. Yeah, Leia will do it.
You're busy talking and shit.
Yeah, I'm angry about that. That's my beef.
Oh, I had missed so many comments because I didn't even realize that the comments were like.
Running in. That's okay.
Oh yeah, they're on the right side of your screen.
Hi guys.
I'm James Taylor Shaw. Like,
this
I
is
don't
the reason.
use these crisis lines. Like, how many of us don't fucking use them? But then we, as like, you know, as advocates, have to be like, they're the only fucking resources that are out there for us if we want to refer someone, and can't be the people who are constantly dealing with crisis.
Right.
Like, what? There's nothing good. So it's like, okay, well, here are these numbers, but caveat, like, they might call the cops on you. What is that shit? And now they've created this 988 thing, which is like gonna just take it up to 11 with the cops.
Right. Like, we don't need to, we already have 911. People know how to call 911. They don't need you doing 911 shit. Like, we already know that number. We don't even have to learn a new one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very angry. That's my beef. Daz, you got a beef?
I have all the beefs. Most of my beef is with my sad brain.
Yeah. Grief is terrible.
And grief is terrible. That's my beef. I don't love this 988 thing. I haven't been in a place where I can really think about it the past couple of days, but I've definitely been in a position a couple of times now where, you know, media contact me about a 988 story, and I realize that the people I know who know the most about 988 and the implications of it and the cons of the potential applications and all of the things, they can't speak on record. And so then I have to like pretend to be a fucking conduit who knows what they're talking about, and like, I do not.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'm trying, and it's just, it's
I think
hard.
a ton of it is that crisis centers are like just now starting to try and prepare, like, what are we going to say? Like,
yeah,
because it's been so disjointed and stuff, what information we have, we're not even in the place where we can get together a statement about what we think about this. And there's a lot of things that are scary about 988.
right. But what the media is glomming onto is are the talking heads who are saying this is so great.
It's the best.
And we even have one who I really enjoy very, very, very much, who's talking about how this is a great win for the LGBTQ population, because it is the first only policy that's been passed unanimously that includes queer people. How the fuck ever? You know, there are
it
so
includes
many
queer
things
people
wrong
in a
with it.
coercive, violent practice.
Right.
That's not good.
But you don't have enough people who are talking to the media saying, hey, let's take a step back and think about what this means. I remember one of them recently. I talked about the Logic, when Logic went on the Grammys with that song.
Mm-hmm.
And calls shot up. It was like, what was it, like 50%?
Yeah.
You know, and there were these huge wait times, and people, you know, who don't know anything about this stuff, they're just like, oh, you know, call for help. If you're waiting for 20 minutes and you're in crisis, you're going to hang up.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the fact that you don't know who's going to pick up the line. They might suck. We're all people. You know, you might have to call back, and then like, who the fuck wants to call back after that happens? It's so complicated. So this 988 thing is not this big shining fucking beacon of hope. Right. And we need to be discussing that in a more nuanced way.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, it's to solve, you know, the suicide problem, but it's not to solve like it's they think that it's going to solve the suicide problem. That's what they're focusing on. But they're not focusing on the bigger picture of what is happening systemically that contributes to suicide.
Right. Like, suicide is not the problem, right? Suicide is like a way that people try and solve some problems, right? Because, yeah.
Right. Actually, but we don't want to think beyond our fucking talking point.
Right. Yeah. We just
suicide is preventable
and then regurgitate them. Yeah.
Right. Suicide is preventable.
Well, not us, but
talk to people, reach out, I don't know, whatever, all the same bullshit, and we just won't dig in. And it's almost like I'm starting to wonder if the people, who are kind of higher up, especially, within the big organizations like Vibrant, SAMHSA, I'm like, are you guys in on something? Do you actually want to help people? Or like, is your income more important? What the fuck is it? Because people are dying because of what you're doing. What is it?
Right.
Yeah. Ashley, do you have a beef?
I'm made of beefs.
Yes.
Me, I'm made of beef.
I guess, I was struggling to think of like, okay, what is my beef for the official beef corner? And I think that I'm just going to kind of like go off of what you guys were saying, in terms of, okay, so like in nonprofits, we've talked about like virtue signaling, white saviorism, all of that stuff. One problem that I have found is, we're doing a lot of talking about like police violence and racial violence, and, having talks with our kids about, what to do if you encounter a cop, like how do you keep yourself safe? But at the same time, the protocol in our organization is that if a kid is in crisis, you call the cops. It makes no sense. And, I've pointed that out, and, I've had a lot of, well, we're just doing the best that we can. Like if somebody's doing X, Y, and Z, then we have to call the cops. If we can't get eyes on this kid, then we have to. And I'm like, yeah, well, we're literally just putting these kids through the exact same trauma that brought them to us in the first place. So it's that kind of like, I don't know what it's called. It like hypocrisy. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Like replicating abusive systems within systems that are supposed to help people is not help.
Right.
That's not what support looks like.
So every single freaking time the cops show up, like I feel uncomfortable because I have definitely been held in a room. Actually, I actually texted Des in 2016. I was texting Des while I was being held in a room with a police officer at the door because I was suicidal. I was held there for 30 hours and not given any food or water from the nursing staff. And a cop sat outside of my door the whole time. And I was a crying mess that, yes, true, I didn't need to be alone, but I was alone in the room. There was just a cop outside of my door.
It's not like they weren't helping, they were just holding you, right?
I didn't want to be alone. I wanted connection, and I wanted somebody to be there with me while I was in crisis. And then 30 hours later, I was sent to inpatient. So I was in crisis for 30 hours by myself.
That's just a lot of fuckery. So much fuckery.
That'll make you want to live, says Julie.
Now, nothing makes me want to live like hanging out with a cop outside my door for 30 hours until I get to go to another place where they take away my rights.
Where would that put you on the 0 to 10 scale?
I was reading a Game of Thrones book. I remember that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Let's talk about something cool. Storytelling and peer support is cool.
Yes.
So let's talk about like the power of storytelling and how you use that effectively as a peer.
Yeah, so let me tell you about my life. No. I met Des in person in real life, which was awesome in 2016 when I accepted the Paul G. Quinnett Lived Experience Prize, whatever, whatever.
We've all won it.
We've all
won it. So sorry, I don't usually talk to people at all, and definitely not this late. But yeah, so when I wrote my story for that, you know, as you guys know, I got to like speak in front of everyone, and then afterward, a lot of people came up to me to talk to me, and a lot of those people were clinicians, and it was very like hush hush, like it was, you're so brave, but it was oh I saw the comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very like, you're so brave that you did that. I have had a very similar experience, but because I'm a clinician, I can't tell anyone. And like, I'm so glad that you're able to share your story because I can't share mine, like that kind of thing.
So much of that, yes.
So I became a peer support specialist, like because of that experience, like that specific experience. I mean, I had lived experience obviously for a long time. But that specific experience of hearing people tell me that they couldn't share their story for some like stupid like rule reason, like I still don't get people who like abide by rules. I don't know rules, which is sometimes what people have a problem with, but you know, these people were scared to share their story, and I thought, God, I don't want to live in a world I don't want to live in a world where people can't say plainly, like, hey, this happened to me. This is what I feel. It's bullshit. And I think that I wanted to become a peer support specialist because of that. And then as I got into actually working as a peer support specialist, I started thinking about my own education. My degree is in mass media, and I did 2 years of screenwriting and 2 years of creative nonfiction, with the intention of writing a memoir. And my thesis was actually like a portion of a book about one of my hospitalizations. So when I started working as a peer support specialist, I was really into the groups programming, because when I was an inpatient, I was a lot of the time, like they would have groups scheduled, but then the person wouldn't show up or something. And so we weren't having groups and there was nothing to do. So we were just sitting there day in and day out in this like very sterile, boring environment, basically just thinking about our suffering and being medicated. And so I thought, God, groups like actual real good groups would have been awesome. So I started running groups as a peer support specialist, and I started thinking about, okay, what has been empowering for me? It's been telling my story, and it's been telling it in a way that like every single time I tell my story, I come out on top. You know, like it doesn't matter if it doesn't end like on the highest note. But like for me, every time I tell my story, there's hope in that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether or not the story is bright and shiny and rainbows, but it's the act of telling it. So when I was working as a peer support specialist doing these groups, I started working with the kids on how can you tell your story in a creative way? How can you reimagine it? And like we have worked on like done sort of like writing prompts, but sometimes we would do, okay, so let's take this portion of your life or something that has happened to you in your life and then imagine it as how you would have liked it to have gone, or like rewrite it in a way that, I don't know, like I don't know what I'm saying. I'm getting like caught up in my excitement for the subject.
That's okay. No, I think all of this stuff is really cool. And there's strong connections to like activist histories around this. I was talking with Ashley right before this about, I think I brought this up actually on the show before about Gloria Anzaldúa and autoethnography and like the power of like telling our stories, and that our stories are part of our like credibility. They're part of our expertise and that they have just as much meaning as like other data in the world, if not more. But so then there's also this piece of like having control of our own narratives is like this core component of epistemic justice, is that like we are the people who tell the stories about our experiences, not someone outside of us. So I think it connects in all of these spaces to like justice-based practices, but also is this like powerful tool of like supporting each other. And that's why I love what Des does. I think this is probably the single best outcome I've heard of from the Paul Quinnett competition. Is that someone was like, oh, like telling my story is powerful and I want to do that other places. Like that's really fucking cool. I'm really glad that's the experience that you had. I wish that your peer support experience was a little doper, but that's okay. There's other ones to have. But I think this idea of storytelling is just really critical in our movement.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, one thing that this brings up for me is sort of the story that gets told about us on paper is so far removed from what the actual story is. So I mean, like you would never know from meeting me the kinds of things that you would see in my paperwork, especially from 2016. Like the psychiatrist had told me that I probably wouldn't function as a normal adult and told me that I would likely be on antipsychotics for my entire life. And I was actually on antipsychotics for maybe a month before they made me so sick that it sent me to the ER. And I haven't been on antipsychotics since then. But the story that is told about me on paper is that I didn't want to take that medication for whatever reason, and therefore I'm non-compliant, and that I'm going to have a lot of trouble functioning in the world, and that I'm not going to be able to express myself in the way that I express myself now. The psychiatrist, like, I think he got fired, but not soon enough. But he had just such a like bleak outlook for me that made me think, damn, like I really am all kinds of fucked up right now. And I think honestly, like, of course I can't get through this without mentioning my partner, but I met my dear, lovely partner, husband, Jim, at the same time I was going through these hospitalizations and being on these antipsychotics and like being in the ER in and out. We met at that time in my life. Like the first time we met, a week later I was in the hospital again. But like if it hadn't been for him seeing who I really was, I don't know that I would have gotten the message anywhere else that I could come back from where I was, because the professionals in the inpatient place, they were painting a very different picture of me. So being able to have someone have faith in me and then renew the faith that I had in myself, and then teach me how powerful it is that I go on and tell people, like, this is what happened to me, and I don't want it to happen to you because it was terrible. It fucking sucked. Like, like that's the power in storytelling for me.
Yeah, I think it's like for me, it's been the most important thing, is like not just my own story, but like our stories are so important. And it's like the space where all of the deepest learning happens and all of the best skills come from. And like everything I've learned that like matters in this work has come from those places. And everything that clinicians have learned also comes from those places, even if they don't think it does, right? Because they've learned all of this on our backs. Yeah. So I think that
learned it.
Yeah, if they've learned whatever they have learned, they've misinterpreted. But no, there's like even the good things that clinicians learn, they all come from us. And so this like lack of recognition about our stories as like something that is like a vital component of this work is really really unfortunate. But I think there's more spaces now opening up for storytelling, Although I think a lot of it is this like performative, like weird, like combination of like tragedy porn and inspiration porn storytelling that sometimes happens. So I'm just hopeful that we can sort of move toward this more like authentic storytelling where we can still be our whole, like we can be our whole selves and we can talk about struggle and things like that. And that people can learn from us, because whatever we're doing right now sure isn't working.
True.
Do you have any final wrap-up thoughts about storytelling or anything else that we've talked about?
No, I don't know. Did people have questions? I don't know, because I don't know that I have any.
No, that's okay. I don't think I saw anything questions. I think people were really excited about everything you talked about tonight. It really resonated with people. I appreciate your time so much. I'm really, really glad we got to talk with you. This is awesome.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, I love all the things we talked about. I feel really, really good. This is that storytelling kind of feeling about like connecting with people about shared experiences, right? That's kind of how I feel right now. So I appreciate you.
Thank you guys so much for having me, inviting me. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Are you done being nervous now?
I'm actually still nervous.
You were awesome. Everyone tell her she was awesome.
Yeah.
Tell her she's awesome.
Also, I don't speak for my organization either.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing that I said should come back and bite me in the ass. No.
Don't jinx it, man.
Actually, you know what? If it happens, it happens. Fuck it.
Fuck it.
Yeah, everyone thought that this was great. So awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
All right. This was awesome. Bye, y'all.